Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Welcome to a special Best Of episode dedicated entirely to the vibrant and results-driven world of pay-per-click advertising. PPC is crucial in digital marketing for its direct results and strategic complexity. This episode dives into effective PPC methods, from choosing the right keywords and managing bids wisely to using data for campaign improvement. We also delve into Performance Max campaigns, uncovering strategies for leveraging Google's latest offering to maximize reach and efficiency. Our expert guests share insights on using Google Ads effectively, creating ads that resonate with audiences, and adapting strategies in an ever-evolving digital landscape. Beyond tactics, we also explore the human element of PPC, highlighting the importance of understanding customer behavior and the impact of personal touch in crafting successful campaigns. You'll hear about using data for smarter decisions, designing compelling ad creatives, and tips for enhancing ROI, all while maintaining the human connection essential to digital marketing success. Join us as we dissect the strategies behind successful PPC campaigns, guided by experts who face these challenges daily. Ready to dive into the tactical and personal world of PPC? Let's get started. Most of your positions have focused on PPC. What drew you to PPC over the other realms of digital marketing?
It's more because I got it in my first job. This is like learn PPC and here's a book, to be honest. There was no opportunity to do like SEO in the first job. We did some like programmatic, maybe some display, stuff like that. But PPC was just what I was given and I liked it and I thought I was good at it. And it made a lot of sense and I enjoyed it. And it wasn't probably till years later that I really like started to read about, PPC and read like, Moz has the SEO Bible on beginners, 101 on SEO. So that's really why I got into PPC. I look at like SEO these days and I'm like, even if there would have been an opportunity to learn SEO even 7 or 8 years ago, so half my career almost, maybe I would have learned it on the side as like a good thing to know, but I'd never master it. And these days, I understand the basics of SEO. I at least know enough to know when people are bullshitting a client, and I know enough to know when something like makes sense or doesn't make sense at a very basic level, but I wouldn't master it. So it wasn't so much a choice as much as like, here's the thing you need to learn for the job. I didn't know really the difference 100% back then between PPC and SEO necessarily, and so I just took the opportunity and ran with it.
I just needed a job to basically like help me pay the bills, right? So sure, anything that comes along, a marketing opportunity came along. And then eventually in that company, I got into the PPC realm. And for whatever reason, it just clicked. I just really loved that aspect, that there were kind of both aspects. There was kind of a psychology trying to figure out people and figure out how you present benefits in that. But also it's still like PPC has historically been very like data driven, stats driven, analysis driven, right? It's not just like you're really thinking through this video and thinking through an anchor video and creating it. And it's kind of hardcore audience and that. It's also kind of, at least, especially when I started, it was even very like, sometimes there's like mind numbing copy paste work involved too. Like you'd go through the keyword list, you just build out this expansive keyword list and then like set your manual CPCs and adjust things manually. And for whatever reason, I just love doing that. So
Julie has become a very good friend. So this is one case where someone who has been a mentor to me has become somebody that I am very close to and love dearly. And we talk about our lives. And when I was sick with COVID in Italy, she was one of the people who Zoomed me to make sure I didn't die of loneliness in a different country. Julie is the current manager of PPC Chat. She is not the founder, if I'm correct. Manages a bunch of PPC communities, always shows up for everybody in the space, new or old. And Julie, along with Ginny Marvin, just to give credit where credit is due, those two are the reasons that I started speaking on the PPC speaking circuit. And Julie, if she's at the conference I'm at, she's front row. She's front row and she's clapping and she's making eye contact with me. So I'm not freaking out. And it's like having a supportive mom. I don't want to call her mom. She's like an older sister, like having a supportive older sister all the time in the space. But early on in particular, she was instrumental in me feeling comfortable in what is an established space. I was so lucky that Julie just like welcomed me into the PPC space the way she did and extended a hand.
Sometimes at those conferences, you really do have presentations that are just that's stuff that's not presented somewhere else. It's really, really good. I have always thought that the benefit is exactly, that networking aspect where you go and you can sit there and then it's like talking about it in between the sessions. It's like going to lunch and chatting with other people who are actually in PPC accounts and just asking them some of those questions that maybe you don't feel like voicing online, right? For the world to see on Twitter or Reddit. And just kind of pondering that stuff together. There's just incredible value with those. So I was just talking to someone about this, where in the PPC community, you'll meet people like this person has a philosophy degree. This person has a, theology degree. This person has a literature degree, whatever it might be. And it's just a cool thing about digital marketing and PPC is that it just brings all these people together. I'm starting to meet more people with marketing degrees, but overall, I just think that, it's been attractive to anyone who has done a little bit of work. And there's something about the creative plus stats analytics side for certain people that's just a draw. And that's what it was for me.
When you have a new client, are there any setup 101 steps you take when first optimizing a new or existing campaign?
Kind of just know where to find the potential things at this point. And if, on my LinkedIn, you'll see it. I'll say it. Like the first place I'm going to go is those location settings. I'm just going to make sure that like we're not vulnerable to other countries coming in with our targeting. Some of those little sneaky, like the display network checked, when it's a search campaign. So it's just all those little sneaky, it's going through each and every campaign. So that is like bare bones, the first place that I am going to start. Probably the second place is going to be those ads. And just because a lot of times I do see just not capitalizing on all the headlines, all the descriptions. And then from there, I can't believe I can like just rattle this off. That's what, but it's just when you've been doing it so long. Yeah. So I go in and I sort by budget, right? So I'm looking at all my campaigns, top budget. And then I literally look at the click-through rate, right? So here's the budget, and that just at the bare bones is going to tell me like, what is that relative to everything else? Where should I start focusing in? And then as I focus in, I go out down into the ad groups and the keywords. And then you just continuously start asking questions that go down and up and back around and circle through. And then, I am, and I probably said this, I think on the panel at the conference that we got to finally meet in person, but I gave the analogy of somebody who plays a video game and they're like a button masher. Where that I just, it's like me in Google Ads. I go in Google Ads and I click on every button, every setting. I'm always expanding it and I'm looking, like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What is this doing? And I just cycle through that. I almost call it cycling. And it's probably my ADHD brain / dyslexic brain that tends to see it. And then I just have a knack for spotting things. And so that's my process.
For lots of clients, it's usually like lowering their cost to acquire a customer is usually the first thing we work on, because part of the reason they're not hitting their, either their ACoS or their ROAS or something like that is because they're spending too much money acquiring a customer. So on September 9th will actually be 1 year since we took on a client. Obviously, this is probably going to come out after that date, so people are going to hear it and think, this happened before. So it's going to be a year with that client. But basically, it's a client sort of in the sports hobby area. And they were on a call with them. And they're like, well, how you can help us make more money? And I'm like, I honestly don't know. But what I do know based on what you said is we need to both lower the cost to acquire a customer, but also increase your average order value. That way it's cheaper to acquire a customer, but you're having each customer spend more money so that your return on ad spend actually increases. Oftentimes agencies will probably work on one or the other, but it's few for agencies to try to work on both. And even though I can't guarantee that I can convince every customer that comes to the website to spend more money, the more customers we can convince to spend more money, though, is better off than not having tried to convince them to spend more money. And so when it comes to like cost versus revenue, we generally work on lowering the cost. So get rid of things that aren't converting, get rid of things that are wasting money. We'll often see ad accounts that have things like YouTube campaigns running or display campaigns running, where if you're a small advertiser spending a bit of money, or even if you're a large advertiser spending a bit of money, you're just getting started with Google, spending money on display or YouTube is often a waste of money. So we cut all the fat, figure out what the true cost is to acquire customers based on what's working. And then we audit, obviously, as we audit the account, we try to figure out like, okay, how are we going to fix this account? Do we need to consolidate campaigns? Do we need to break out 2 campaigns? Do we change some sort of setting or feature in the campaign? And then once we get things sort of stabilized where, we have pretty consistent sales coming through, there's a pretty consistent, let's say, CPA to acquire the customer, then we can worry about scale and revenue at that point, right? Because the ad account is stabilized. Too many people try to scale an ad account too quickly. It's like, oh, I've got a week or 2 of data, things are consistent. How do I scale? And I'm like, a week or 2 of data is great, but you want to have a month, 2 months, 3 months of consistent sales that you can kind of predict what you're going to have sale-wise, and then you want to try to scale things. You don't want to try to get a little bit of data and scale because you're impatient. Impatience is often a thing that breaks most ad accounts because people are trying to do things too quickly. And so that's how we tackle it. We sort of hammer away sort of at the CPA, and then we worry about scale. We don't try to actually do both at once, which is probably what most people try to do. But I'd rather spend a little bit of money or less money than what the client was spending, get things consistent, and then figure out how to scale versus trying to scale at the same time as trying to lower the CPA. You can't actually do both at the same time.
Does it make sense to do manual bidding anymore?
Absolutely. And there are a couple of different scenarios that pop into mind, just an obvious answer of when to use manual bidding. Number one is when you are just launching a campaign. And it's just important to start out where you have control. You really can tell Google, hey, these keywords, I want to bid X amount, but maybe there's some other, say, top of funnel keywords that you're not willing to spend, $10 a click. And so you want to bid down on those. You also get insight into, and I mean, you would get this with an automated bid strategy too, but when you're seeing the age ranges or the household income or demographics, you're able to manually adjust the demographic bids that you're saying, hey, this age range we should be bidding up for them because they're converting really well. And having that control in so many different ways is important because in order to move into automated bidding, you want to achieve a high number of conversions in a short amount of time. There's, I would say that 30 conversions in 30 days is kind of the statement that people will make of when you want to start considering moving into an automated bid strategy. And just as your campaign gets started, you having the control right away, it can be more efficient with how you use your budget and help generate those conversions quicker so you can then move into the automated bid strategy. So that's the first way that you would use a manual bid strategy. The second, and this is, I would say, a little bit more stressful of a way, is when you move into an automated bid strategy and you're not seeing the success that you're hoping to. And you can test different automated bid strategies. And sometimes it's just, you need to go back to square one and you need to get that control back. And so we've taken campaigns off of different bid strategies or automated bid strategies and moved them back to manual and gotten that control back, really just worked at that granular level that we need and to better control cost per clicks and where our budget's being spent, and have then been able to move those campaigns back into automated bid strategies and seen success from them.
I still do manual bidding for brand just because brand intent is so widely varied. I really, a lot of people are like, well, they would click on our brand anyway. When it comes to brand, I'm like, that's a business decision if you want to defend that turf or not, as far as I'm concerned. I've never been a very declarative statement person. I'm a huge believer there are a million shades of gray in life. And that's usually what I teach. And brand is one of those things where you'll have people kind of declaratively state, we should always do it or we shouldn't. It really depends on the company. I mean, some companies, they have competitors with really deep pockets that are just trying to steal their traffic no matter what. So that's one of those situations where, whether they should do it or not, if they do it, I usually recommend that you cap the bids just because it will get more expensive than it probably needs to be for the fact that it's brand, because, Google's it's going to do what you tell it to do, right? So I'll still use manual bidding for that. I really don't use it much anywhere else. Reason being, Google knows better than me what people are likely to do, which is creepy, but it's the truth. So they can make millisecond decisions on costs and bids that I can't possibly make as a human being. They know everything this person has done in the past 3 months. I have no clue. So their value to me as a marketer is in their likelihood to purchase or likelihood to be a good customer. It's not necessarily, it's because they search for this thing, they're going to be a great prospect, right? So I think we've finally gotten away from that, which as a marketer kind of makes me happy because I feel like it was just getting so nitpicky with that stuff that I was like, we're really getting away from marketing at this point. I tend to rely on the bidding strategies, and I usually am pretty much a fan of when it comes to lead gen, figuring out a target CPA that's going to work, just because it's really easy for it to, be quadruple what you want if you're not careful. With ROAS, I kind of find that if I tell it to maximize ROAS, that almost always works better. I don't find that it works as well on conversions for some reason. It might just be my experience, but I'm a pretty big fan of target ROAS, assuming that they're e-com that with a wide variety of product costs. So at this point, that's pretty much what I rely on is going to be either, automated with a target for CPA and then automated maximize ROAS, and then obviously manual bidding for brand still.
Will you start off with the max clicks or do you go straight to the automatic for a new account?
I usually go straight to automatic. But what I will usually do first is if it's conversions, I'll try maximize conversions first. Just to kind of see what's it doing and where's it coming in. Because you can have the opposite problem where if you're like, I want my CPA to be $10, and if it's never going to get below 80, it just won't spend anything. So what I'll usually do is I'll usually kind of, warn the brand, say, look, this might come in higher, but we're doing this on purpose because we want to understand what does it look like out there? Like how much are these clicks? How likely is it we can even reach this CPA? Because if we're within a couple bucks of it, we can do it, right? But if we're like $50 off, we got to figure out, is it the click-through rate? Is it the cost? Is it the conversion? You're like, what the metrics that we can control? Is there anything we can do to fix that, right? So that's usually where I start off. And then with ROAS, if they've had, if it's been connected to Google Analytics or GA4, and it has, historic data that it's been pulling in, I find it doesn't take it that long to fall in line pretty quick with getting a decent ROAS if it has the data that it needs.
I think it's a good point. I don't think people think about that when you connect it to GA4, Google Ads actually gets that data.
Yeah, I feel like it responds faster with ROAS than it does with CPA. I'm sure that there's some technical geek can tell me why. That's just my marketing brain's observation has been that it tends to respond faster to a good ROAS than it does CPA.
When I started working in Google Ads, we had so much control. I mean, just down to the price that you were willing to bid on a single click. You could manage that, connect down to the cent almost, and you could fine tune your ad groups to where you would bid on one specific phrase and you would pay this much for that phrase. And it was just very, very granular. And then over the past 5 years, we've slowly lost that control. And so it has now evolved to where you could, in theory, just turn on a campaign and Google will take advantage of everything from your keyword bids to your, when it needs to be bidding up for certain audiences or time of days, things like that. So it's almost on a 180 very, very quickly.
So why do you think Google is going in this direction? Why is it so important for them to try to make things as automated as possible?
So there are a few big reasons that Google touts for these changes. One is that it's easier, right? And it makes it more manageable. Not everyone has access or even knows that there are agencies that can manage campaigns like this. And so if you are a small business and need to run these campaigns for yourself, then Google's intention is to make it very, very easy for you to generate leads for your company. Secondly, you get access through these automated bid strategies to a bunch of different additional contextual points that Google has access to, right? So me looking at the Google Ads screen, I can see, age, gender, demographics, but Google is collecting all of this data in the background about user behavior and things like that, and can make more intelligent decisions of when you should be bidding up or bidding down. And by you, I mean Google will be doing that for you, bidding up or bidding down, and therefore is in theory using your budget in a wiser way because it sees more than you do
How do you avoid Google from basically forcing its recommendations and AI on your campaigns?
So I turn off auto apply recommendation stuff. I am not a fan of their auto-generated headlines. They're terrible. I have used ChatGPT though. I mean, sometimes when you do a product for so long, you're like, I don't know how else to say this in 30 characters for a headline. Like, it does a really good job of coming up with short, snappy text when I get stuck. It's really helpful for writer's block because a lot of times with ads, you're not saying something completely different. You're just saying the same thing 8 different ways. I can get through about 3 to 4 and then I'm like, I'm out of ideas. I don't know. I've used it for that for sure. Just not for longer form copy because it sounds like AI, but short, snappy, attention getting stuff, it's actually pretty good for. It's really good at making alliterations. It can make some really cute puns. It can make some stuff that would stand out in ad headlines. So I've definitely used it for that purpose. Other than that, I don't use it a ton. Then I said, like with Google's odd, because Google just scrapes stuff on your site and sometimes it'll pull the weirdest metadata as a headline. I'm like, that's not a headline. So I don't really use Google's that much, at least for a creative perspective. I do like kind of the automated insights they give in the account. That's actually helpful. Like when you look in Performance Max and it's like insights and it tells you how audiences are indexing. I like the data output that they give you from the AI side to help guide the decision making, but I don't necessarily implement many things using it aside from bidding, like we discussed.
There is definitely the need for human touch with these campaigns. It's good to have somebody, from an agency or have a team constantly looking at your campaigns, making sure that Google's not taking liberties like bidding $200 for one search term that it feels is just the best search term. And then to see that it doesn't convert and you've spent, a significant amount of money on just a single click. Really, and that's a huge benefit of having, again, a team where people are looking at that and that doesn't get tossed under the rug. And we have the tools and the strategies to adjust for that and monitor that over the course of the campaign.
So it sounds like there's certain things that Google automates, right? But if you don't have the right person pulling the levers, pushing Google in the right direction, then Google can really go off. And I think I've seen it before, like with some of the, I think it's called like smart campaigns, right? Where it's like, a local business can go, put their budget, say what they do, and then just like hope that things happen. And that's like a good example where kind of like you let Google do everything on its own. Often those sort of campaigns don't really do too well. But in our case, where we're talking about, large and technical Google ad campaigns, that automation's there, but it's only a part of it. It's still just like another tool. You still need to have that master craftsman who's putting everything together.
Exactly. And I would say that I call it the service level, right? But it's just in the Google Ads platform, right? Like we are toggling things such as budget. We are managing the organization of the campaigns to ensure that budget is being sent to the proper places. We can see where we need to adjust because other areas are receiving too much budget. We are ensuring that the search terms that we're showing for are appropriate and, have a good potential of generating leads, or they are generating leads and we need to drive more of those leads. But then, and I would say that this is the biggest benefit of having an agency, there's all of the back end conversion tracking and really ensuring that anyone can see that you're generating leads, but on the other hand, who's ensuring that those leads actually convert? What's the revenue associated with those leads? Can you funnel that information back into Google Ads to better inform your campaigns? And again, that's really taking advantage of the automated aspect of Google, but it's a very manual process of working with the sales teams and getting that information, making sure you're funneling it back into the account, and again, just better informing Google in its decision making.
So I literally just had an extended conversation on Twitter about Performance Max today, where I kind of I've not talked about Performance Max a lot online, and I think this is why. So the timing of this is kind of humorous because I think I have a better idea of what I think about Performance Max, and that is that I just don't know. I think there is so much we don't know about Performance Max that it's very difficult to formulate hard opinions. And my concern is how much I'm seeing Google and in some ways other advertisers pushing hard opinions about performance max, especially when it's in kind of the positive way, because there are certain aspects of it that I feel like I have unanswered questions to that are pretty big. So a few of those would be, okay, first of all, what we've seen is that overall, if you have, and this makes sense, but if you have a lot of data, so you have a lot of conversion data, you have a lot of spend, you have a lot of ability for Google to just go nuts and really find stuff, at least even within directly tracked stuff, Performance Max really does seem to do well. It can just be very hit or miss and tends to be more on the miss side for smaller accounts. But again, that's oftentimes who Google suggests should try Performance Max, right? And so you just have like oddities there, especially the disconnect between who they say should use it. And I don't know, maybe that started to shift within Google. But as far as I know, that, they've always been big proponents of, hey, this is for anyone in some way. So go ahead and try this. You're just starting out. Sweet. Build a Performance Max campaign. So you have that aspect. You have the aspect of, we are very early in a significantly account consuming campaign type. We are very early in identifying what that does to a bigger business reality. So what I mean by that is, if someone primarily uses Performance Max, let's just give it the benefit of the doubt, even if it is sending directly tracked sales and you're hitting your ROAS, you're hitting your efficiency targets. Like, what is that doing if you're going to run that for the next 3 years of your business life, 5 years of your business life? Like, what are they doing? Like, who are they actually running after in their targeting for their audiences, especially? Are they primarily, and this is what a lot of people have kind of investigated and talked about, is that, are they primarily, especially if you have a ROAS target on there, are they primarily pushing at your bottom funnel? Because if that's the case, then like, how is that a sustainable long-term solution if you're just never really going after, you're just never generating demand, you're never really, going after top of funnel stuff? So at the very least, and this is part of what we do when we do utilize Performance Max, is we still utilize it in a fairly like comprehensive account wide. Like, we have YouTube stuff running, especially for top of funnel. We're still very much targeting specific things with search. We're still running standard shopping campaigns on the side as well. And we're utilizing Performance Max. So I just think that there are some questions around that sort of mindset that still has me just going, with Performance Max. And we're testing it. We have found it to be, in terms of, I keep saying directly tracked efficiency and revenue for a very specific reason, because based on what Google's tracking and what Google says as far as what you're receiving, then it can often do very well, especially if it has enough data and enough revenue. But again, kind of that bigger picture of how it's working within all of your marketing channels, I actually think still is not fully answered, at least from what I've seen. So I'm concerned when people are just very much all in on PMax, even at the extent of primarily using PMax because of those questions. So that was a very long rambling reply. But again, like I said, it's kind of in my brain as of this morning even. So,
not to bring up conspiracy theories, but do you feel like things like PMax are just here to cover up? Like, it's like, oh, we're not getting enough retargeting spend, so let's find a way to get people to do more retargeting. I don't know.
I don't think it's too much of a stretch at all, because Google has been, found out, if you will, like sued. There's settlements in that for a variety of bad faith gestures that they've done. And I'm forgetting some of the names of those. There's one that I'm pretty sure it has the word Jedi in it, actually, ironically. I want to say it's like Blue Jedi or something. I can't remember. Mike Ryan, we've talked about this and he's brought it up. I think Project Bernanke is something like, so all that to say that, I'm not saying, I'm not explicitly stating that they are doing something wrong. I'm just saying, like, there is evidence that they are not unwilling to mess with ad targeting in that in a way that helps their bottom line, right? So if you have, let's just say, a campaign type like Performance Max, where you can target any placement within Google Ads, so any placement within any auction that the system wants to target, and there's no external visibility on that at all. So, like your question, right? And you know this, so I'm saying this more for your audience, but like your question, it's very fair. And guess what? Neither of us can determine whether or not Google's doing that because it's completely hidden within the system. And so like, is it that much of a stretch where if they have some placements that are lower value, but they have some spend to attribute, and as long as they're hitting your ROAS targets, to slough off traffic and spend into those poor performing placements that otherwise someone explicitly targeting them would never choose? I don't think it's much of a stretch or conspiracy theory at all. And that sort of campaign type like offers the perfect environment to do that.
Now, not directly related, but does this change your view at all on Performance Max or how people should look at Performance Max campaigns?
So interestingly enough, I firmly believe that Performance Max needs to be part of every account. And I would actually argue, and I think I made this point in the post, that your broad match budget, would be very well suited going to Performance Max. And what's actually very interesting about Performance Max with how much more data they're sharing is that you can now start to get a sense of what should your exact match terms or concepts be off of your Performance Max campaigns. And if you are uncertain and you're still not sure about Performance Max, try running without it for this quarter, just see how you do. And then there are actually a lot of benchmarking tools that will let you see how you're performing against your competitors. And you can even look at your own internal data. If you feel like you are still in a perfectly viable place, then that's totally fine. But I have a feeling that what you'll see is that you're a little bit down on performance. And it's not because your standard campaigns or your traditional campaigns aren't beautiful and wonderful and doing great. It's just that there are certain placements that you will be depriving yourself of. And there are certain kind of, I don't want to call it preferential treatment because it's not stated. In fact, it's actually the opposite. The standard will get the preferential treatment, but you're not kind of leaning into Google's toys. So I feel like you will, and this is again a feeling. It's not, I know this conclusively, but I feel like you will see worse results, not including Performance Max. But to that point, whenever we've tried to just run Performance Max, we see those Performance Max campaigns suffer. So there is a place for Performance Max in traditional campaigns. And I actually am really excited for the day when we just run Performance Max campaigns and we don't have to have a budget for traditional standard campaigns. Not because I don't love traditional standard campaigns. They're wonderful. They're what we built ourselves towards. But because I don't think the average business should need to or is going to be able to, at scale, have a budget for Performance Max and traditional. Like you typically have your PPC budget and you shouldn't have to have double, triple campaign budgets.
What you're saying about Performance Max, do you feel like it's the same for lead gen businesses or lead gen accounts, the same as ecom?
So this is where I think you are going to get so many different opinions. And it's, I really want to preface this. This is my opinion based off of what I've seen. Everyone is going to have a different opinion. I believe Performance Max works as well as it possibly can, provided that you give it the customer values for your conversions. The moment you do, you will see beautiful results. If you deprive Google of your conversion values or in max conversion value bidding, you are going to see worse performance with Performance Max because it's oriented around revenue. Like that is the main driving force of that campaign type. And part of the reason why it's so powerful is that it's able to look at the full funnel. It's looking at display, it's looking at YouTube, it's looking at now like demand gen type campaigns, it's looking at search, shopping, it's looking at all these things. So I definitely think that there's value in Performance Max by 100%. I don't think you can get away with running a campaign without Performance Max unless you are so niche that there isn't enough data or there aren't enough competitors that you can just get away with running standard. But for most people, you will need to have Performance Max in your arsenal.
Final question. Do you like to remove branded terms from Performance Max campaigns or not?
I personally will remove branded. I don't think it's reasonable to average in branded into Performance Max. But there's actually a really useful distinction on new customers versus new visitors. If you are looking at new visitors, that is going to be the true mark. Just excluding new customers, you might still end up with people who've been exposed before or have engaged. So you definitely, and thank you to Kirk Williams for that little shout out. I definitely recommend looking at your new visitors and doing that at your best to exclude them. But I also think you will do very well. This is one of those times where it does make sense to engage with the Google reps, ask them to remove your branded terms, use the branded terms exclusion for the broad mesh campaigns if you're using that. Yes, keep them separated. And on the flip side, make sure that your branded terms are negatives in your traditional campaigns, because that negative protection is actually very, very powerful. You don't just want to rely on audience exclusions or pressing a button. You actually want to go ahead and, where possible, add it as negatives.
So how do you determine what creative and value statements you want to highlight most?
Yeah, so this one is definitely more challenging, and depending on your brand and your company, you may not have a very well developed brand story, company story, value propositions. And so it's going to take, and if that is the situation, then you're going to want to see what your competitors are doing. And the first question, and this is for any business, even without any marketing, you need to know why somebody is going to want to do business with you. Like, what is it that makes you special? What is it that makes you better? What is it like? Why purchase from me? And that's what you're going to want to put into the ad to test out. If you have your brand is well established and you have a specific look or image, then I think it's a little bit easy. You want to, even then, it can be really hard because on the different mediums, the audiences can be very different. And so if you have available to you any kind of demographic information or like demographic indexes, that'll help you identify elements that your audience could potentially resonate with. Maybe like golf, for example, or like they watch the tennis a lot, or just those are and then you can test those different elements until you get a good quantitative benchmark of what works and doesn't work. So there's testing. So I said a lot of things here. So branding, value propositions, you're going to have, if you don't know what those are, you're going to test them out, having good understanding of demographics, and then just a lot of testing.
People often underestimate the value of really good ad copy, right? People see your ad, whether it's a shopping ad or a search ad or discovery ad. Or Google now has a new ad type called Demand Gen. It sounds made up, but it's a new ad type campaign. So I think people often underestimate really good ad copy. You could have the right shopping feed, you could have the right keywords, and the difference between success and failure could be just writing better ad copy, because maybe your ad copy is the issue, assuming that your shopping feed or your SKUs or the keywords weren't the issue. So I think that's something really good. Something we were talking about with a teammate the other day, actually, is sometimes people overcomplicate things. Sometimes the solution is actually very simple. The analogy I give is you pull a lawnmower outside of the garage, you're going to try to lawnmower the lawn, and it doesn't turn on. People would often try to say, oh, let's pull off the cover and see if the wires are disconnected, or they'd go really complex when maybe the issue is if it's a battery operated lawnmower, maybe the batteries need to be charged, or there's no gas in the lawnmower, right? Sometimes the solution is actually very simple and we try to overcomplicate things. Even though in some ways Google and Meta has gotten more complex because of automation, it's actually gotten really easy because they want you to simplify things to make it less complex than it used to be. Trying to simplify things, I think, is number 2. Ad copy is number 3. And then beyond that, if something's not working, I always say they need to change something, right? If you see something that's it's day 1, it's day 2, it's day 3 of the week, so this week is Wednesday. If it's Wednesday and something didn't work on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, then maybe make a change of some sort. Don't watch the thing that's not working continue on throughout the week. If a campaign's been running for, a month, 3 months, a year, and then all of a sudden it stops getting conversions on Sunday, it's now Wednesday, you need to make some sort of change. Watching something break and then not do anything, you might as well not even watch it break because you didn't take action. And so I think taking action is really important. People often will just look at something, see a problem, and then not do anything, when if you don't do anything, you're part of the problem. You need to take action and make a change, even if that change is something as simple as like, I'm going to lower the budget or I'm going to change the ad copy. Those are two simple changes you can make in a campaign, depending on what the problem is, that could turn things around. But just watching, hoping that it's going to like turn itself around is probably not going to be the case. Because our general rule is, if something happens over 1 to 2 days, that's an anomaly. A campaign can have a bad day. It could even have a bad 2 days. But if you're on day 3 or you're on day 4, well, that's a trend. And so you need to take action and do something come day 3 or day 4 so you can turn things around. Otherwise, the campaign is probably going to continue on the same path and not do anything.
So Nava, I know you've been a proponent for broad match for a while. Recently, you and Optimizer put together an amazing study about the difference between broad match and exact match, as well as optimizing on maximized conversions or maximized conversion value. And I'd love if we could dig into that a little bit deeper today.
For sure. An important disclaimer, this is just as much a case study in being okay being wrong and pivoting off of the data as it is a case study on match types and bidding strategies. So a little bit of context. I have defended broad match for a very, very long time. And I truly believe that there is value even after this study. If broad match is doing its job and you give it its very specific job, it can still do beautiful things. However, we as marketers, particularly those of us that maybe have had the volume of many accounts or high spending accounts, have maybe given broad match a little bit too much credit, because what we actually found is that when broad match and exact match are compared, exact match not only wins when it comes to cost per acquisition, cost per click, conversion rate, all these things, but you don't actually lose any of the conversion volume that you would expect to lose when comparing broad match to exact. And part of why that bit was so impactful for me is that as a pragmatist, I kind of just went along with, broad match is where it's going. We kind of just have to deal with it. But when in looking at the actual data and seeing it play out in accounts that's using both broad and exact, it's really hard to stand by the, yes, we should really lean into broad match when we see how much value is in exact. And some of the data points and kind of arguments I would use for broad match were actually completely countered. So one of them is broad match is the cheaper way of getting phrase in exact. Exact match actually had substantially cheaper cost per clicks. Another thing that was one of my big lean into broad match, it's going to be great, is with close variants, you're able to get kind of these new and exciting ways of searching. You're able to kind of really unpack these things. But when looking at exact match, looking at the rise of close variants with exact, you're going to get the same benefit of close variant. You're just not dealing with the grab bag of broad. So this is not to say to uproot what is working currently in your account. If you're seeing conversions, if you're seeing a good cost per acquisition, if you're seeing all those things, that's great. But absolutely, if you're considering whether to pause your successful keyword concepts in favor of broad match, I would exercise a little bit of caution. What I will say in relation to broad and exact, every single account where exact match did better, broad match was present. So there is a place for broad match. We just don't want it to be the dominant force.
There really is no such thing as match types anymore. I think, aside from, broad is still very broad, but phrase and exact are practically interchangeable at this point. So, we used to be very intentional with match types. They'd go into their own ad groups because Google it wasn't smart enough to figure out what you were trying to do. Now it's gotten smarter. I wouldn't say that it's the smartest. At this point, now it's kind of like we just start, more is kind of better. You kind of have to start lumping this stuff together a little more. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of phrase and exact together. The other thing I never used to use was broad because it was terrible. And it's still not great for nuanced industries, but for things like e-com or more commodity type products, one of my favorite things to do has been to just set up filtered audiences and run broad match to them. And the cost savings is usually just ridiculously amazing. It's you get waste, but it's so much cheaper than phrase and exact that it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like, we'll insert the negative keywords. I'm not too worried about the media waste because it still winds up being cheaper. So it's about finding those pockets of like, where can I let Google kind of go crazy, but where can I put in some guardrails to make sure it doesn't go too crazy?
PPC campaigns, always the end goal. You're usually working within a budget, a limited budget. People and businesses usually don't have infinite funds. Funds are allocated to pay-per-click campaigns for one reason or another. So you're working within a limited budget, and then your goal and your KPIs are likely to generate as many leads as possible within that budget. Really what most agencies are working on and optimizing off of is that cost per lead, and getting that cost per lead as low as possible. Because then if you can get that as low as possible, you're squeezing out as many leads as possible for the spend.
What are some of the challenges you experienced working with the larger budgets, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I manage campaigns up to $1 million a month. The challenge is usually, all things being equal, you're probably doing things on a global scale. You're probably not just running ads in America, unless you sell a product that everyone in America wants to buy on a repeat basis. And you're probably maybe running ads on Google and, Meta or Facebook at that point. The biggest challenge as you have larger budgets, even though larger budgets are easier to manage, all things being equal versus a smaller budget, because you have a longer runway, the biggest challenge is there's just more moving parts. And so you've got to keep your eye on more things. It's kind of like someone on stage juggling plates or juggling balls, right? You've got more things in the air to make sure things are going well, from conversion tracking to just spend is going correctly. You set up the campaign correctly. We've all seen campaigns where somebody meant to set up a remarketing campaign, but they didn't add the audiences. Someone meant to set up a non-remarketing campaign, but they had audiences anyways. Just lots of little basic mistakes it's easy to make when you've got dozens or maybe even 100 campaigns across 3 or 4 ad accounts, because you're marketing in North America, you're marketing in Europe, you're marketing in Australia, New Zealand, parts of Asia. So the larger your budget gets, the challenge could be, especially if you're in 6 or 7 figures, is just that you've got more things going on, and you've got to have a better system and process or standard operating procedures of how to check performance, make sure things are going well. A good example for a client that we've had for 3 years is early on in year one of the dev people made a change on the website, which is fine. Changes happen on websites all the time. There was a change where it worked out that the shopping campaign stopped delivering conversions, but all our search campaigns were fine. And so someone on our team didn't notice that, even though they should have, because some of the top campaigns were shopping campaigns. And so as you just spend more money, it's just really keeping an eye on what are my top campaigns? Are they delivering consistent sales? Is conversion tracking working? People often ask, what the difference is between, small and spend. And I think everything is just at a larger scale, and you've got more moving parts. And for me personally, that's more fun because you can test more stuff. You can try more things. You're more likely to have somebody at Google or Meta reach out to try some sort of beta or some sort of alpha. But if you want to step up and play with all the adults, so to speak, and not be, let's say, at the kids table, if you think of small budgets as a kids table, even though it's not, because small budgets are hard work, you've got to be prepared to just work at a larger scale and have more things potentially break or go wrong.
So how do you approach a client usually about increasing budget? After that, once approved, what strategy approach do you take when implementing a budget increase?
If the campaign is doing well, it's really easy to have that conversation, at least in my experience. And it's not, it's about performance, right? Because we're creating marketing campaigns because we're wanting sales. And if there are sales, then we should do more of it. And that to me is a very easy conversation, because if the volume exists, that's the first part. If the volume exists, there's demand for it, and you can project what the incremental revenue sales are going to be, then that conversation is super easy and a fun one to have.
But sometimes you have a group, so when it's e-com, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Yes.
But sometimes in these lead gen campaigns, it's not exactly clear. It's not 100, so I guess in those cases, it's a little bit harder, where it's you're seeing the leads are coming through, but you're not exactly sure the conversion rate of those leads, but, budget is limited. So I guess in those cases, it's going to be a little bit harder.
It depends on how long the campaign has been running for, right? So if it's only been running for a month or two, that may not be enough time to have a good sense of what performance is going to be. If you have a relatively good conversion rate for the industry, then and it depending so okay, the first a couple of things I would look at, right? So what the CPL is looking at, like what the current like CPL to like what the to acquisition, what that conversion rate looks like. If there's any, if there's none, then what do we think it's going to be? What is our current share of voice of the traffic that exists, and what does our visibility look like? And so knowing that information can help you determine, are we spending enough money, right? Or do we have a good enough chunk of it for this to be a good test? How do we feel about the quality of the leads? But even if they're not converting, there has to be a sense as to whether the leads are of good quality or not, right? Because you're talking to potential customers. And the answers to that question, those questions will help determine whether how long a test and what the budget should be and whether a budget increase should happen. If the traffic volume, like we're getting maybe 10% traffic share and the visibility is relatively low, then to me, that's a pretty easy suggestion, right? Hey, I don't think we're spending enough money to be competitive here, right? We barely show up. We're getting a lot of clicks we're paying, but for this set of keywords, for this industry, it's the right budget is probably X amount more based off of this traffic, right?
So when you do get an increase, what's the strategy to implementing that increase? Like, do you throw it in all at one time? Do you spread it out? How does that work?
With budget increases, I typically like to this is definitely a personal approach kind of thing. Everybody's going to do this a little different. I tend to prefer doing it more conservatively. That's just how I usually like to do this. Some people will throw it all in right away just because they want a quick read on it. It's going to depend on the client too, right? You're going to work together and be sure that you're aligned with what we want to do with the extra budget. So sometimes the client will be of like wanting to get the results really fast, and then you're like, oh, I don't know about that, and so there needs to be alignment there as well. But typically I like to go in slowly and see. And I want to say that it takes generally a year to really get a good idea of what your paid search campaign how it's gonna perform. Like you want to have at least a good solid year of good volume to have a good enough data set to make decisions off of.
UTMs provide us with all that extra value, and then you can actually relate it to the customer. How have you seen this make all the difference with campaign optimizations?
It is game changing. When we tie UTMs to leads that we are then bringing into some form of CRM. And with that CRM, we can kind of organize and say, here's a lead and all of that lead's information. And this is the campaign it converted on. And this is the keyword it converted on. And then the customer can tell us, was it good or not? And we can combine all of that information to say, oh, hey, these campaigns and these keywords drove more or less quality leads. And that helps us make optimization decisions within the actual ad account and say, this is really where we want to push spend. Perhaps cost per lead is always important. However, getting good leads is more important. So sometimes it's thinking about how do we get more of those leads while maintaining a reasonable cost per lead, and combining that information and those two goals to really reach the client's goals.
It really depends on what the goal is. You can't answer any other questions unless you know what you're trying to do. And the goal is usually sales. It's almost always sales. Even if the goal is leads, it ultimately results in sales. But yeah, goals are usually sales, leads, traffic, impressions, some kind of action.
Do you ever find that you have to argue with, let's say, a client or a boss where they feel like the goal should be maybe more of a softer metric, but you're pushing for like, no, it's got to be, something more measurable like sales and leads?
Usually, if that situation happens, it's because there isn't a good measurement infrastructure. there isn't a very good connection between the like offline and online sales, for example. That's usually the case where you have to look at a different kind of metric that is a pre-metric to the ultimate metric, which is sales. And that's where it gets a little bit fuzzier.
But I feel like these days, it is a lot easier than, let's say, 10, 20 years ago to kind of combine those two, right? Things that happen offline, you can actually bring that into the platform and be able to optimize off of that.
Yes, it's a lot easier today, but depending on the client, like, for example, if you're like the places that I worked at, we've had brick and mortar stores, and we want to know what the impact of an impression of a digital ad has on a store walk-in. And that's where it gets a little bit harder I mean, there's ways around it, but it gets a little bit fuzzier.
But for a lot of B2B and service-based businesses, people don't fill out a form. They actually pick up the phone and call the business directly. Mm-hmm. So, okay, you've created this really nice system for when people fill out forms to be able to track where they came from. But what about the people who pick up the phone and call? How do we know where they came from?
First, it's just really important to make sure you're tracking all of those types of actions that somebody could take, because we've seen it in many cases where you think somebody's going to fill out a form and it turns out the whole industry just wants to pick up the phone. So phone calls are extremely important. The way we deal with phone calls is we implement call tracking numbers. So we basically purchase a number that is the first number that somebody calls, but then they are routed to the client and to the business they are calling. And what that allows us to do is using that call tracking software, we can capture that phone call and all the information related to that phone call. We can see where that phone call came from. We can listen to the entire phone call. How did it go? How did the customer service member serve the customer? And then also, what were they asking for? Was it relevant to the business? Was it relevant to the client at all? Was it a good lead? And then we can basically score all of those calls and say, this is a possible lead, this isn't. And frequently we'll get tons of calls that hung up after 1 second or 10 seconds. And that's likely a bot. And immediately we're able to filter those out. What that does is we can say, okay, we got X amount of quality phone calls and we got Y amount of non-quality phone calls. And then we can actually see, okay, what is our cost per quality phone call? How much are we actually paying to get these? It could be you're getting 10 quality phone calls and 50 other calls. So really that would very much skew your cost per lead and what you are reporting to the client in terms of success. So I think that's one major part of it. The other part of it is telling Google that information. And one way that you can do that is based on certain aspects of the call. So we'll do like phone call length. If a phone call is 45 to 60 seconds, then we'll feed it as a conversion into Google and say, hey, Google, you can optimize off of calls like that. But calls less than that, we don't want you to optimize off of. You don't even count it as a conversion. So then the calls that are like 10 seconds long, we don't want Google to continue finding those for us.
Is there any tracking that is often overlooked for agencies in particular when it comes to PPC?
If you listen to the conversations in the industry, people talk a lot about certain attribution as being like, this is the best one. I'm not going to name the company, but you do hear that. But then I also take a step back and realize that attribution has been a question since 2007. I remember when I was working on the corporate side at Nationwide, we put so much money into attribution, had perfect modeling and this and that. Okay. And I'm like, I'm still having this conversation this many years later. So I'm just going to say our brains. And the reason I'm going to say that is like, I can read what the data is showing in the platform and I can ask my business owner, how's business going? And I have to align those two things. That's what matters.
That's very deep because sometimes, a similar concept, and I think we can break it down. That same call that I had yesterday, she said that my PPC agency is telling me I'm having this much ROAS, and my Facebook agency is telling me I'm having this much ROAS. But if I had that ROAS together, I'd be doing really well. And when I look at it, I don't have it. So like, what's going on, Danny?
Yeah. And what's going on is exactly what she knows in her heart, that that's not what she has. I'm proud of her for that's her first admission. So, if I were talking to her and I'm sure you had that, I'd be like, yes, you're correct. Now let's keep doing what we know are the right things from a marketing perspective. And let's see if we can, directionally navigate and get these a little more in line. But she's right. Like, that's great.
And so, what's also interesting related to this point is I don't think we have to get super deep into GA4, Google Analytics 4.
Yeah.
But in just a slight, small point, I feel like as we've gone into Google Analytics 4, it's a little bit harder. It's not as accurate. The data is not as clear. There's thresholding. There's this and that. And it's hard for some people because a lot of people look at Google Analytics as like the Bible, right? And that's what it says. So in a sense, the fact that Google Analytics 4 is a little bit not as accurate, not as clear, it's actually helping us portray this story, which has always existed. It's been very easy to turn away and say, no, you can track everything and everything is really clear.
So I have a little secret nugget on that one to help people. Listen, you're going to like, and you probably know this. So, I have a Squarespace, I have a WordPress, and I also can get into the back end of my hosting. So guess what is in all those? Analytics. There's analytics in my Squarespace it's a straight graph, right? Like you do not need to put your brain on. It's what you want. Same with WordPress, right? You have like their, I don't know, whatever they call it, the C panel. I have a couple different hosts. I could look at my server logs, and guess what? When Google is still crawling your website, even if it's not indexed, there's a difference between being crawled and being indexed. Google is absolutely visiting my site. They just have chosen not to index it because my quality isn't good. It's just, so the data is there, and if you're feeling really insecure, just look at your server logs.
On the subject of GA4, because you can't talk about privacy without talking about GA4 and kind of how that data all plays out, I think the biggest area that people are going to be impacted is really on audiences, because there's a thresholding piece. So you need to have a certain amount of people, and there can be some brands that just are not going to have them. So you're going to need to rely on more the native audiences than your own personal ones. And the other piece is the actual mapping of data. So a lot of people will get undefined or not set or all these things because of syntax, but also because some folks may have started opting out of letting their data be tracked, and that is A-okay. What you just then need to do is, with the data that you have, make the most meaningful decisions you can. So for example, if you see that a certain page on your site is getting a lot of traffic, and that page has nothing really to do with converting anybody, that's a good sign to see, well, is there an opportunity to update this page so that I can improve it, that it can convert? Is this a sign that I may be directing people to the wrong page? Now with paid, we have a little bit more control over that. On SEO, it's what you optimized for. But that's definitely a consideration. But I think a lot of the general sentiment with GA4 is there's this rush to fix it, even though we had 2 years to get it done. And there's kind of this comfort in knowing how much data were we actually using versus how much were we hoarding. And I think it's a very important mechanic of being a human, that we tend to hold on to things just because we feel like we have to hold on to them that we could have a use for it, rather than what is truly making a difference in our business. So from a GA4 standpoint, I think the more that you can make sure that just your baseline is set, i.e. you have events that are tracking for conversions. I had a client that had no events for conversions for a little bit. That was scary. That was terrible. I was pretty sad. But barring that, you probably have the information that you need. There's no reason to stress. Where I do see some folks probably getting a little bit frustrated is going into the shopping season, because we're now using two completely different data sets. So unless you have your Universal Analytics backed up, or you already can move to GA4, you're probably going to hit an issue of, well, I can't really truly compare the seasonality, but it's not the end of the world.
So Google plans to phase out third-party cookies from Chrome by the end of 2024. It's already begun the rollout of an update to 1% of users, which is about 30 million people. How should advertisers react to this major change to the marketing landscape?
The good part is they're doing it at a time where I think most places have been conditioned to understand they have to own their data. I think if they had done this back in the day before that was really such a focus, it would be scarier. In a way, I mean, them doing this is kind of like phase 2 of what we experienced with Facebook ads in iOS 14. Because a lot of places didn't build a business. They were just essentially, they thought they had an e-commerce business. And then once Facebook couldn't find those users because it lost, 60 to 80% of the data it was used to having, they couldn't fix the algorithm that quickly. So I think a lot of places learn the lesson of there are certain things that are going to change and we have to own what we own. And part of being a responsible business is having diversification, and part of that diversification is data that you own. So I think the good part is, places have been pretty diligent about understanding that they have to collect that data. I think the part that most places don't necessarily do effectively all the time is utilize it. So I see a lot of places that connect data, but they don't feed it back to Google so that it can learn a little bit more, like especially with offline sales. You know what I mean? Like I just did an audit on a company that they have both e-commerce, but then they also have like consultations and offline sales, and they import back the revenue, which it's like they're like one of the first companies I've seen actually do that when they have e-commerce. A lot of places just like, oh, we have e-com and then we have stuff that happens offline, but we don't really account for that. So I think more places are having to get savvier about understanding that their data is a big asset. It's like they've only have really thought about it as it being an asset for their business internally. I don't think many places have been trained to think of their data as an asset on the ad platforms as much beyond retargeting. So I think that that's just kind of a new habit places have to get into. And I feel like they've been given ample warning to do it. So I'm not really freaking out about it that much, just because at least the clients I've worked with, they know it's coming. They know they have the data. Most of it's just a question of how should they be using it? It's like they're looking for advice of like, if I import it back in Google, should I change the conversions it's optimizing to? Should I, it's like it's more technical questions like that as opposed to like, oh my God, I haven't been doing anything. I really don't run into that. So I think we're in an okay position. I mean, no marketer wants to see this stuff go away, but you can't give us nice things. Like we cannot have nice things because there's always bad apples that ruin it. So this was not a surprise that this is happening.
So let's say smaller business owners or smaller marketers, given that they're so used to third-party cookies, what's the first step you think they can take in order to get ready for these changes?
So one of the things that I've encouraged a lot of places to do, especially, and I feel like this actually, it's not even necessarily small business, but it's kind of the non-e-com world that I think it's tougher. You know what I mean? Because when someone buys something, you automatically have data, right?
You have all their information.
Exactly. So. But like in long-term B2B enterprise sales, or, it's like lead gen stuff, or the stuff that doesn't transact on the site, or it doesn't have a dollar value assigned to it. Those are the things that, I've been advising, start figuring out ways that you can capture data that would make sense. For, B2B SaaS, one of the things that I was just on a call with a founder this morning, and they're about to close on their first series. And he's like, we've done no marketing. I don't know what to do. And so I said, the first thing you do is, I'm like, you have to start for their product, especially because they have to cut through a lot of noise. As I said, you need to come up with a really solid content strategy. And as quickly as possible, you need to make sure you reserve some of that content for email updates and get people onto your email list as quickly as possible. So they have to retrain themselves to start thinking from a micro conversion standpoint, because, so many people spend money, they dump money into these platforms and they're like, I want a conversion. Yes, that's always the ultimate goal. But at this point, you have to start thinking a few steps back of like, what are other things you can own other than just the sale that will prepare you to be able to say, okay, hey, Google, here's like all the people that have, created a lead, or they've signed up on the site, like feed that through GA4 to get it back there. So you have to figure out like, what are those other signals that show that someone is a good prospect that you want to feed back? Once people think through it, they're like, oh, that's not so hard. But it's like, we've just been conditioned forever to be like, even in Facebook, it's like, set it up, optimize for sales, optimize for conversions. And you didn't have to think about that middle part. So we're having to pay a lot more attention to that middle piece of marketing. And a lot of places might be lacking that part of it if they're not e-com. So those are the ones where I say you need to figure out a reason to capture people's email, but it has to be a good one. They're not going to just fork over their email address and phone number because you're like, help me, I'm losing my data. You need to come up with something in exchange for that. So that's sometimes it requires a little creative thought.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.